Now I want to take the output shaft and set it up vertically. So let me move it a little bit and re-clamp it. We'll put the second gear blocking ring assembly on now. Remember, it's a 3-piece design just like the first gear. We'll put that down, and remember there's 3 little slots here in the blocking ring, and those slots have to line up with the synchronizer inserts. So turn that around until they line up, goes down. Then we put that center part on that has the fiber backing. Remember, this has been soaking in some transmission fluid. Put that right down on top of it, just like that. And then you have that cone-shaped inner part of the blocking ring, and that goes down with the cone, or the, let's say, chamfered part facing down. And the inside, those splines line up with the splines that's on the output shaft. So just turn around until that lines up, falls down in there. Then you have 2 thrust washers like this, and the one that has the larger inside diameter, that's what goes on next. Goes right on top. Kind of push it down with your finger, and you'll know you're far enough down when you reveal that snap ring groove right there. Now I'll take one of the new spiral lock snap rings and engage that in that snap ring groove. Now you'll have to kind of like open it up and start one side and then work your way around. May have to use a little small screwdriver or something. There you go. All the way in. Now it's time to install the second gear. Now this transmission did have second gear damage. Let's take a closer look at it. You look and you see on the dogs, it does not have that sharp edge like a roof of a house. It's all rounded off, beat down. They're in pretty bad condition. Now in most repair manuals, the next sequence of parts installation goes as follows. They want you to take that little thin washer, remember there's 2 of them that's like this. This will be the larger diameter one. Install that on the shaft. Then put the cage needle bearing for second gear. This will be the medium size one. Put that on. And then take the second gear and install that. Now I have found there's a flaw in that sequence of parts installations, and I'll show you why. If you look at that washer, you can see that there's right much movement in it. It does not fit tight on this shaft. And there's enough movement that if it is not dead center, when you go to install the second gear, that washer may hang up on the ledge of the gear. It will keep the gear from going all the way down. And you won't notice that the gear isn't on far enough until it's time to put this snap ring in place here. You won't be able to install the snap ring because the gear will be setting up too high, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. So I use a different sequence of parts installations to keep that from happening. What I do is install the second gear first. Put that down on there. Remember, the little slots in the gear will have to line up with the tabs that's on the blocking ring. Just like that. Now I know the gear is all the way against that steel thrust washer that's on the bottom. Now I put the thin washer in. Remember, this is the larger diameter one of the 2 that's in this transmission, and I may have to wiggle the gear back and forth just a little bit to get that washer to go down in it. Maybe use a screwdriver to help me. Then I put the caged needle bearing, and remember, of the 3, this is the middle sized one. And again, I may have to move the gear just a little bit to get that needle bearing to go in there. And now I know I'm in deep enough so I can take the thrust washer. Remember, there's two of them in this transmission. We just installed one a little while ago, and this one has the smaller inside diameter. And it goes in this position, and then I'll put the snap ring on. Now what I should do is put just a little bit of transmission fluid in there so that soaks down into that needle bearing. And then we'll install the snap ring. And remember, there's two snap rings that's like this. This is the thicker one. This is about 125 thousandths of an inch thick. And there's right much tension on this snap ring, so we'll have to open it up with the pliers and bring it on down. And it takes a little bit of effort. There you go. And make sure it's all the way in the groove. Now this would be a good time to test this slider out. As you can see, second gear and first gear is free to move on the shaft, but inside the transmission, when you put it into first gear, this slider goes down. The fork in the top of the transmission pushes this slider down, locks first gear to the shaft. Put it back in the neutral position. If you go to second gear, the fork moves the slider up, locks second gear to the shaft. And so you can see this is working fine. Put it back in the neutral position, and this would be a good time to give just a short explanation on how the synchronizer does its job. All right, use your imagination and understand that when you're going down the road, this shaft is rotating along with the slider, and the second gear it's rotating too, but it's rotating at a slightly different speed. So if you wanted to make a second gear change, which is this slider going up into the gear, it's going to have a clash. So we want to do something to reduce that or eliminate that. So if you look in here closely, you can see the blocking ring, which is resting on the slider. As I lift up on the slider to create the second gear, you can see that the blocking ring is going up also. And as the blocking ring goes up into the gear, it's pushing that fiber-backed ring to the gear too. So as I put a little bit of tension on the slider and I go to turn the second gear, it's much harder to turn this second gear now. That's what we want. We want to create enough friction to force the second gear and the slider to rotate at the same speed. And when this happens, and understand this is all happening in a fraction of a second when you make the 1-2 gear change, then the slider can easily find its mark, go home, and you have locked the second gear into place. That's why it's very important for the blocking ring to be in good shape, the fiber backing that's on the ring to be in good shape to create that friction. The teeth on the blocking ring needs to be nice and sharp, along with the dogs on the gear, which, remember, this gear did have some damage. This is a new gear here. And with the dogs having that rounded off teeth, it makes the splines in the slider have a hard time finding its mark. You might say, like my fingers, if I take my fingers and spread them out here like that, it's easy for my fingers to find, my other fingers, you might say. If I have my knuckles, now I'm having a hard time getting my knuckles to jam down in my fingers. That's probably a crude explanation, but that's why it's very important to make very close inspections of all these parts. And if there's any question about it, you really should replace them. The next part to install is the third gear. Now there is a caged needle bearing that goes down in this, plus one of those little washers. I have found that there is no problem with the gear hanging up on the washer in this position. So we'll go ahead and install that first. Take the little washer. Of the two that's in the transmission, this one has the slightly smaller diameter, and that drops down on that snap ring that we installed earlier. Then we take the caged needle bearing. Of the three, this is the smallest diameter one. Put that down on the shaft. Then take the third gear and orient it so the blocking ring area and dog teeth is facing up. Drop that down on the shaft. We'll put just a little bit of transmission fluid down in there so it lubes that needle bearing. Then we'll take the third gear blocking ring, and understand the third and the fourth gear blocking ring is the same. It's a single piece design. It's been soaking in the transmission fluid. We'll drop that right down on the gear, and now we need to assemble and install the 3/4 synchronizer assembly. Here's my parts. You have the synchronizer hub, the slider, 3 inserts, and 2 insert springs. Now, to assemble the 3/4 synchronizer, it takes a bit of a practice, and it's quite a challenge. You feel like you need 3 hands to do it. What I do is I start off by installing one of the inserts. Remember, this synchronizer has the inserts with the little shoulder on it. Put one in this position here. You kind of have to install it from the inside. Then I take one of the insert springs, and like the 1-2 synchronizer, one end has a little 90-degree angle bent into it, and you just slide that right into the insert and wind the spring around in a clockwise direction. Then I take my finger, hold on the end of the insert, flip it over, and then I put the other insert spring. Same thing, the little crook end goes into the insert, wind it around in a clockwise direction. Just like that. So you look at it and you see one spring is wound this way, flip it upside down, and you see the other spring is wound in the opposite direction. That's what we want. Okay, we've got one insert in, and to put the other inserts in, it's quite a challenge. The way I do it is I look at the spring, I find the area where it's at the midway point, I take another one of the inserts, go on the other side of the spring, push it down, and as I try to install the insert, you can see that the spring is hanging up on that little shoulder. So I need to take a screwdriver, pull back the spring so I can get the insert in. Now when I do that, when you go on the other side, the spring is going to want to try to pop out here. So that has to be pulled out. This will be at the end of the spring in this direction right here, and so it'll be a little bit easier to pull that out either with my finger or with a screwdriver to get that engaged. Now, because my hands are going to be all over this thing, you won't hardly be able to see me do it. As we film it, you'll just have to kind of take it on faith that this is happening here. Okay, let me put the other one in. There you go. I was surprised I was able to do it that easily. Now take the springs and push them all the way down in the bottom of the hub on both sides. Get it all the way down. And now we'll put the synchronizer sleeve in place. Now to install the slider, we need to orient this hub like you see it here. The raised portion is facing up, the countersunk portion facing down. Then we take the slider and we take a look on the inside, and you'll see there's some grooves cut in it, just like with the 1-2 slider. You'll see a deep groove with 2 minor grooves on each side in 3 positions on here. So you find one of the deep grooves, put a little mark on it, and we'll install that so that mark is lined up with one of the inserts. Remember too that the slider is correctly oriented when you see there's this little groove cut on one side that's facing up. Okay, we take the little mark, we line it up with this little insert here, get it nice and square, push it straight down, and it's ready to install on the shaft. Now that you've seen how the individual parts go on this synchronizer, is there an easier and faster way of assembling it? Yes, indeed. Just take your synchronizer sleeve, remember the little groove faces up, index your mark over one of the slots where the inserts go, just like that. Install each one of the inserts. Take the insert spring, start it in that top one, wind it around clockwise behind the other two inserts. Support the hub and the sleeve, carefully turn it upside down. Take the other insert spring, install it in that top insert, wind it around clockwise behind the other two inserts. There you go. Done. Now to install the synchronizer assembly on the output shaft, we need to do a couple things. First of all, that raised portion of that hub faces up, countersunk part of the hub faces down. And another thing we want to do is, remember we made that little mark there that lined up with the one of the inserts. We have to make sure that the blocking ring that's in the third gear position, the third gear blocking ring, has to, that little groove, one of the three grooves, have to line up with one of the inserts. So what we'll do is we'll mount this on the shaft, then we'll line up the synchronizer blocking ring with that mark. Now normally there's a slight interference fit on this hub, so it does not directly go down onto the shaft. It'll have to have a little bit of help. So you could take that 1 1/4 inch galvanized pipe, go over to the ram, stick it on there, press it down. I believe that I'll just use this 1 1/8 inch deep well socket, put it right on top, and then I'll just carefully tap it down. There shouldn't be that much of a press on it. I have to be careful because if I get tapping too hard, it may want to make that slider fall off of the synchronizer hub. So let's give it a try here. Okay, the blocking ring is locked into the hub. You can see the gears turning, but the blocking ring is pretty much standing still because it's locked into one of those inserts there. The last thing I'm going to do is to take that needle bearing thrust washer and its shim and install that on the top of the shaft here. Put the shim on first. If you have new ones in your overhaul kit, I would definitely use a new one. Take the needle bearing thrust washer, put that right on top of the shim. Then I like to take a little bit of Vaseline and kind of glue this down, keep it from falling off when you're installing the shaft. Now we will not install the 4th gear blocking ring on right now. That's installed after the shaft is put in the case. And with that, I would say we're ready for a final assembly. Now it's been a couple days and we're on the downhill slide of this project. We want to start putting the transmission together. First thing we'll do is put the reverse idler in the case. Take the shaft, run it through the back of the transmission a little ways, just like that. Take the gear, orient it this way, gear portion going toward the front of the transmission, slotted part where the fork goes in toward the rear of the transmission. Put it on the shaft, then take that little O-ring spacer, put it on the shaft next, then run the shaft all the way through so the roll pin is facing up, just like that. Be sure the roll pin is below this ledge and about 1/8 of an inch of it protrudes out the bottom. Now I can install the counter shaft into the case. I'll move the reverse idler gear as needed. Carefully feed the shaft through the hole in the rear of the case. Now I'll slide the front bearing into the front race. I'll drop the rear bearing over the back of the shaft. Before pressing the rear bearing on the countershaft, I'll slide 2 pieces of bar stock under the countershaft gear. This will spread the load from the gear to the case instead of through the front race and bearing. I'll make sure the countershaft is resting square on the bar stock, and with a 1 1/4 inch inside diameter pipe, I'll press the bearing on. Remove the bar stock and install the rear bearing race. It's time to check the countershaft end play. I'm using another bearing retainer because most of the tabs were broken on the original. I'll install the retainer without any shims for now. Be sure to index the wide tab of the retainer over the reverse idler pin. Install bolts and torque down 10 to 15 foot-pounds if you have a torque wrench. Put the dial indicator right on the nose of the shaft, lock it down, zero out the gauge, and then reach in here and lift up on the counter shaft by hand. Just pull it right on up and take a reading. Looks like I'm getting about 114 thousandths. Do it a couple times. May have to re-zero it. Now, after taking 2 or 3 readings, I found that the average reading I was getting was 114 thousandths of an inch on this transmission. So that becomes my shim size. Most of these transmissions will actually have 2 shims in them. They'll have a thick one and a thin one. And it's the combination of the 2 that will give you a total of what you want for a 0 end play reading, which would be 114 thousandths on this transmission. Now, you have a little bit of wiggle room. Most of the time you can't find the exact shim that will give you that perfect reading. So you can have anywhere from a 0 end play up to 5 thousandths end play is still a acceptable reading. Now, for a high performance application, you might even want to put a preload in it. So if I was getting a reading, an average reading of 114 thousandths, I may add 2 thousandths to 116 thousandths of an inch, and then when I install that, well, I'll actually have a 2 thousandths preload on those bearings. Now, I wouldn't go much beyond 2 thousandths preload, especially with a steel stock retainer. Now, the aftermarket makes some of these billet retainers that can take a whole lot more preload, and again, I don't think you would want to go beyond about 3 thousandths preload, because all you're really doing is just stretching the case. So we want to try to keep this kind of close to 0. I'll see what kind of shims I have here. Okay, I looked in my assortment of shims I had, and I was able to find one that was 117 thousandths of an inch thick. Now, that will put it a little bit to the tight side, but I believe I'll be all right. Now, a little warning here. If you wind up having to use 2 shims, which is often the case, always put the thickest shim against the bearing race. The thinner shim always goes toward the bearing retainer. Now, take the bearing retainer, index it correctly, make sure your shim is in position, put your bolts back in, and torque them down. And the torque spec is 10 to 15 foot-pounds. Okay, now we want to bend up the tabs. Always use a tab that has not been used before. If you try to rebend one of the tabs that's already been used, it will probably break off. And if you have a retainer where all of the tabs are broken on it, you really should replace the retainer. I think you could probably get away with just putting a dab of medium grade Loctite on the threads of the bolt and then torque the bolts down to the spec, and you likely could get away with that. Ideally, you want to have those tabs against those bolt heads though. By the way, when you look down at this part of the retainer, be sure that none of the tabs interfere with the hole in the back of the case where the bearing goes. I've remounted the case into my holding fixture. If you don't have one of these fixtures, that's fine. But at this part of the assembly, you do need to come up with some method to keep the case from moving around on your bench. Possibly mounting it between two blocks of wood, or if you had some angle iron pieces, you might be able to make your own holding fixture by clamping the case down to your bench using that. Now, just before we put the output shaft in, there's a couple items I need to put in the case first. Here's the reverse shift fork and inhibit spring. I'll mount that down in the case. I'll get that fork mounted down in the slot that's on the reverse idler, and then bring the inhibit spring and mount that on that little tab that's in the case right there. Now, some later model T5s may have a slightly different spring arrangement than this one has. Now I'll take the reverse fifth gear link and put that down in the case. I'll make sure it clears the reverse shift fork for now. Then I'll take the pivot pin, stick it through the hole and through the hole in the lever and the linkage, and thread it about one thread. Then take a rubber band, put it around the linkage and the pivot pin to hold it in place. Now I'll take the reverse fork and mount that little roller in the linkage like that. Now I can take the output shaft and mount it in the case. I have to be very careful. Use both hands. It's fairly heavy. Get it down through the hole in the back of the case. Bring it on down into the case and let it mesh with the counter shaft at the bottom. Now I'll put that rear bearing race on. And I'll get the race lined up with the hole in the back of the case. Try to get it to go in nice and square, just like that. Sometimes you may need a little plastic hammer to maybe kind of tap it in. Now I'll take the fourth gear blocking ring that's been soaking in transmission fluid and mount that on the front of the 3/4 synchronizer. Remember, you have the three little slots that's in the blocking ring, and that has to line up with the inserts in the synchronizer. So I'll feed that through the front of the case here, and you may need to take the output shaft and move it rearward just a little bit so the blocking ring clears that front gear on the counter shaft. All right, now I'll move this around so the slots line up, and a lot of people will go ahead and put the blocking ring on the synchronizer before they install the shaft in the case. The input shaft goes in next. Remember, you have those 15 loose rollers that need to go down in that cavity or pocket. I like to use a lot of petroleum jelly, put it in there. Does a good job of holding those rollers in place so you can install the shaft. There you go. Just takes a little patience. Sometimes they fall down. You may have to do it a couple times, but it's this shaft is ready to be installed. The blocking ring is in position. The Torrington needle bearing and shim is glued to the front of the output shaft. I've got the 15 rollers glued real good in the input shaft. Now I need to line up that little cutout place on the input shaft so it is adjacent to the counter shaft gear at the bottom, kind of at the 7 o'clock position. I still have the output shaft moved rearward just a little bit to give me a little bit more wiggle room. Now I'll very carefully try to slide the input shaft into the output shaft. I'll kind of reach in here and kind of pick up on the shaft a little bit. And don't be surprised if you have to do this 2 or 3 times. Sometimes if you don't get everything just right, those little needle bearings will fall out. Let me see what kind of luck I have. Looks like I have the slot lined up with the countershaft gear, and try to go in just real nice and square and try to get that where I can feed and feel that those needle bearings line up. And I don't quite have it. There you go. I think I'm kind of close now. Kind of move back and forth. My blocking ring kind of slid out, but I think I'll be okay. Go on in. There you go. Now I'll take the input shaft bearing race and put it in the throwout bearing retainer without any shims. I want to leave the shims out for now because we're going to check end play in a little bit. Slip that down in there. I don't want to put any sealant on it yet because we will be removing this. So I want to mount it on the front of the case, and this little slot relief right here will face up. So I'll put that on the shaft. May have to move the input shaft just a little bit to get it to line up. All right, and then I'll put the 4 bolts in and torque those down 11 to 20 foot-pounds. All right, now we'll slip around to the back. I'll make sure the output shaft is as far forward as I can get it and that the bearing race is fully seated in the case. Then I'll take the 5th gear, or the drive 5th gear, and mount that on the counter shaft, get that installed, and now I'll put the 5th gear synchronizer together and install it. Now I assemble the 5th gear synchronizer very much like the 1-2 synchronizer. I take the insert springs, mount one on, wind it in there clockwise, flip it around, put the other one in so the little, the little crooked end is in the same slot as the other one. Wind that one in clockwise. Then take the little inserts, mount those in each one of the slots, and put a rubber band around it. All right, see how I have it? Now lay it back on the bench. Have the raised portion of the hub facing up. Take the slider with the chamfered part facing up. There's no indexing on this slider. We'll just get the thing lined up and push it straight down. And now you should have it. You may have to do this a couple times. Sometimes the springs will fall out of place. Looks like this one worked out all right. I'll take the 5th gear blocking ring and install that on the drive 5th gear. Now this blocking ring does not have any backing on it, so there was no need to soak it. But I have put some Vaseline on it to kind of hold it in place. And I'll mount it so one of the slots is facing straight up. Just like that. Now I need to take the 5th gear shift fork and the 5th gear synchronizer, install that all kind of one piece. I've put new inserts on the fork, and when you run the shaft, the shift shaft down through the back of the case, it needs to go through the reverse idler shift fork and that inhibit spring, and just carefully run it right on through. As you run the shaft through the reverse fork, the little roller may pop out of the 5th gear link, and that's fine. We'll get that later. Get the shaft through the inhibit spring. There you go. As I get in here, the 5th gear synchronizer will ride up on the counter shaft. And before I install it on the counter shaft to get the splines lined up, I have to remember that one of the inserts must line up with the slot in the blocking ring. So I have a little mark here that you probably can't see in the video, but I have a little mark on the slider to let me know where the one of the inserts is, and that'll get it lined up. And many of these transmissions, including this one, the splines here on this hub has a slight interference, so it does not slide up easily. So I'll have to take probably a big socket like this, put right on the end here, and I'll gently kind of tap the hub on, and as I'm driving the hub on, I'll have to be kind of careful because the slider could pop off. I'll have to continue to guide the little shift rail on into the hole that's in the front of the case. So let me start tapping on it here and kind of watch myself. Okay, now I'll put the fifth gear synchronizer retainer on. And remember, these little tabs here line up with the inserts. And just like that. And now I'll put the snap ring on the back. And this snap ring has right much tension, just like the other ones. There you go. Okay. Okay, now I'll take the rubber band off of the reverse fifth gear lever, and I'll start screwing in the pivot pin. Now as I do that, the lever will start moving in toward the inside of the case, and as it does that, I need to line up that little roller that's on the reverse fork and on the fifth gear shift rod. And by the way, the inhibit spring could have popped off on you, and if it did, just reinstall it. There you go. Screw it in the rest of the way. There you go. If you have a torque wrench, it's 12 to 18 foot-pounds on this pivot pin. Now we need to take and put that little E-clip on. I'll put the backup light switch in now. I've put a little bit of that Teflon sealant on there. I also put some Teflon sealant on the pivot pin as well. And use a 7/8 opening wrench to tighten it. Now I'd like to take just a couple minutes and talk a little bit about power transfer in this transmission. Now all of these gears on the output shaft is in constant mesh with the counter shaft underneath. So how do you get the different gear ranges? Well, understand the fourth gear that's on the front, which is attached to the input shaft, is always turning anytime the clutch is engaged. And of course it in turn is hooked to the front gear on the counter shaft. Now the counter shaft is always turning, and so are these gears, but until you lock in one of the sliders, they're turning freely on the output shaft. So to transfer power, one of the sliders need to be locked into a gear. Let's use second gear as an example. I'll take the 1-2 slider and move it forward, which gives me the second gear range. Now I have put a little bit of a small white mark on the input shaft right here, and I have another little white mark on the output shaft. So I'll start turning the input shaft. I'll give it 1 revolution, and you look over here and the white mark has not come up yet. So let me give it another turn. I'll give it 1 more revolution, and then when I bring it to the top, you look back here and you see the white mark. Well, in this transmission, second gear is about a 2-to-1 ratio. So that is how we have transferred for second gear. If the slider is moved into any of the other ranges, it goes through another gear which has a different number of teeth on it, which will give you the different ratios. I want to put the shift cover on now. What I want to do is make sure that the linkage is in the neutral position. I want to make sure that the 1-2 and the 3-4 slider is in the neutral position. And also want to make sure that that rear race is all the way tight in the case. Banging around earlier kind of loosened that up, so I want to make sure that's right against the case. Then I need to put a thin bead of silicone on the top of this case. Now I'll go ahead, run a bead on the inside of the bolt holes, just like this, all the way around. There we go. I'll take the cover, make sure it's in the neutral position. I'll line the forks up with the sliders in the transmission, just like that, carefully. And I'll come in from the right hand side, go on down, and move it over as I get in contact, just like that. And I'll take some bolts. I'll use the 2 shoulder bolts first, put those in, then put the rest of them in, tighten it down. Okay, I think I got them all down good. The torque spec on this cover is 6 to 11 foot-pounds, which is not very much. I believe if you used a speeder wrench with just one hand, as tight as you can get it with one hand, it would be pretty much 10 foot-pounds. The extension housing goes on next. Remember to put the little vent up in this little cavity here, and then I want to run a thin bead of silicone all the way around. I'll make sure that the shift rod is in the neutral position, which means the hole is going to be straight up and down, just like that. Then I'll take the extension housing, slide it up on the back, and I'll bring it up to where the shift rod just starts to come through the back of the extension housing back here, and I'll stop right there. I need to take the little detent ball, put that right in the middle of the shift gate right there. Then take the remote lever, put the little spring in the end. I've put some Vaseline on it to kind of glue it down. And then I need to engage that spring onto that little detent ball. Just like that. And now I need to move in the extension housing and start forcing the shift lever into the remote here, or the offset lever. And it takes a little bit of doings. Let's see, just like that. You kind of got to do it at the same time. You've got to be pushing on the lever and on the remote. And I think I got it. I'll put the bolts in now, torque those down 20 to 45 foot-pounds. All right. Back in the back, I'll take the roll pin, put it down in the remote shift lever. I'll have to line up the hole just a little bit. I'll use this pointed punch to get it centered, and then hammer the roll pin in. There we go. And I'll put that little plastic cup in the back of the lever. Now it's time to make the end play adjustment. So I'll take the transmission and bring it up to the vertical position, and I'll clamp on the dial indicator. And zero it out. I'll take my block of wood, put it under the input shaft, and lift up on the shaft and take a reading. It looks like about 33 to maybe 34 thousandths. Okay, I'll flip the transmission around and we'll remove that throwout bearing retainer. I'll remove the bearing race and put the end play shim in. Now for this transmission, the ideal shim would be a 33 or 34 thousandths of an inch shim. The shim that was originally in this transmission was a 31, which would put it a little bit to the loose side. I have a small assortment of shims here, and I happen to have a 12 and a 21. Now the 12 and the 21 would give me 33 thousandths, which would be ideal. Ford says 0 end play is what you want, but you can be plus or minus 2 thousandths of an inch. For a street transmission, I think that would be the way to go. If this transmission was going to be used for drag racing, I may want to put a slight preload on it. Well, I have a 15 thousandths shim also, so I could use the 15 and the 21, and that would give me 36 thousandths, or in other words, 2 to 3 thousandths preload. For a race setup, I may want to install that. I think for this transmission, 33 is going to be ideal. That's what we'll use, and we'll put it back together. Now, just like the countershaft retainer, if you use two shims, you want to use the thinner shim against the retainer and the thicker shim against the bearing race. So I'll put the thinner shim in first, the 12 thousandths. Then I'll put the thicker one in, the 21 thousandths, and that will go against the bearing race. And just slide that right down in there. Now I'll put a bead of silicone around the retainer and we'll install it on the case. I'll run the bead right down the center of the retainer between the bolt holes, and when I get to the bolt holes, I'll go around to the outside of it like that, all the way around. Okay, there you go. And remember, when I install it, this small open slot, that needs to face the top of the transmission. All right, when I install it, I have to be kind of careful because the race may fall out on me. So let me get it down there kind of close before I let go of it. There we go. Kind of wiggle it around a little bit. Get it down on it. Put my bolts in. And I'll tighten the bolts up 11 to 20 foot-pounds. Very good. All right, what if you wanted to make an end play adjustment check and you didn't have a dial indicator? Is there another method? Well, if you go to the Tremec website online, you can download their repair manual. And in their manual, they have you using a depth mic. What they want you to do is measure the distance between the flat surface of the bearing retainer, or the throwout bearing retainer, and then measure down to that inner flat surface where the outer race rides. Now, it doesn't take into account that many retainers, like this one, has this raised ledge. So you actually have to make two measurements. You take your depth mic, put it on the top of that ledge, and then take your thimble, run it down until it hits that bearing surface, and that becomes your first measurement. Then move the depth mic over so the anvil is mounted like this, and you take your thimble and run it down till it meets the flat surface of the retainer here. Take that measurement and subtract it from the first measurement, and that would give you the distance between the flat surface here down to that bearing surface where the race rides. On this retainer it came out to be, I think, 239 thousandths. On your retainer, when you measure it, you'll probably get a slightly different reading. Then Tremec says to take the depth mic, put the anvil on the outer bearing race here, and then measure down, run your thumb wheel back, kind of hold down tight against the anvil, and measure down to the face of the transmission case. Now, I found that there's a little bit of a problem making this measurement. I find that the outer race rocks a little bit on the bearing. If you're not real careful, you might put the anvil up on the inner race of the bearing, which sets up a little bit higher. That'll kind of give you a false reading. And that because of the little bit of variables and the rocking of the outer race, I was getting different readings. I got anything from 199 thousandths to 204 thousandths. But I think the trick is to take this measurement several times, and eventually you'll get 2 or 3 readings that's exactly the same. And I believe that would be the number I would go with. Then take that measurement number and subtract it from that depth number that you came up with, and that would give you the shim size for a 0 end play reading. All right, well, what if you didn't have a depth mic either? Is there yet a simpler way to make this adjustment check? Well, I got to thinking about it for a while, and I came up with an idea where all you need is a feeler gauge. If you remember, I said that originally this transmission had a 31 thousandths end play shim in it. And I think you'll find that generally these transmissions will have an end play shim of, say, 25 to 35 thousandths of an inch. And there'll be some exceptions, of course. But I thought, well, what if I stacked up a set of shims in here that would give me a total thickness of, say, 45 to 50 thousandths of an inch? Then when I install the retainer on the output shaft, it would actually set up off of the case, and I could take a feeler gauge reading. So what I did, took a look at my selection of shims, and I had a 12, a 15, and an 18. Put that in, and that gives me a total thickness of 45 thousandths of an inch. Then take the bearing race and set it down in the retainer. Then temporarily put the retainer on the input shaft, and then push it down, and as you can see, the retainer is setting up off of the case. So then I'd take and make a feeler gauge reading. Now, I did this off camera a little while ago, and I found that a 10 thousandths goes under there with no problem. Now, always, push down on the retainer, to take all the slack out of it. And it's good to make your feeler gauge reading, in a couple places like that. And a 10 thousandths went in with no problem at all. I tried a 14 thousandths of an inch, that didn't go in. And then I tried a 12 thousandths, and on this one a 12 thousandths went in with a slight drag. So I used 12 thousandths as my control number. Take 12 thousandths, subtract it from the 45 thousandths, which is the total thickness of the shims in the retainer, and you get a reading of 33 thousandths. That should be the shim size that would give you a 0 end play reading. And again, if you were going to use this for racing, you could always take that number, add a couple to it to, say, 35 thousandths of an inch, and that would give you a little bit of preload. I believe this method would work for you just like it did for me. No problem at all. With the transmission horizontal again, I'll go ahead and put the speed sensor in, bolt that down. Go back to the front of the transmission and we'll put that neutral switch together. Remember, you have that little pin goes down in the hole. And then put the switch in behind it. If you have the shifter out of the car, you could install it now, bolt it down. Make sure you have all the positions. Get 3 quarts of Mercon fluid, fill the transmission up, and with that, this transmission is ready to go in the car. Well, thanks for watching this video on rebuilding the T5 transmission. I hope it was informative, maybe took some of the mystery out of repairing the 5-speed. Good luck on your projects, and I thank you again.